have the right to swing your fist, but that freedom stops at the tip of another person's nose. And right now, these blockaders are taking away the freedom of other people to move their goods and themselves where they want to go, and that is wrong. And the government has laws and tools in place to combat it. Right now,
but
the Prime Minister is...
What should they do? If the Prime Minister were to say, force the RCMP to go in, that could escalate things and backfire in a big way, could it not?
Right now, the Prime Minister is globetrotting, campaigning for a UN Security Council seat, while here at home, all hell is breaking loose. Our economy is about to be turned on its head. Our entire transportation system is being blockaded. We have CEOs of some of the largest employers in the country who are stepping forward to say that this is a crisis, and what we hear from the government is that they're observing the situation.
Our government is closely monitoring the situation at hand. We live in a democracy. Individuals have a right to protest peacefully. Obviously, that right comes with responsibilities, and it must be done so in accordance with the law. We hope all parties will come to the table, and that a process that's in place will go forward in terms of we can find a resolution, and at the same time ensure that protesters have the right peacefully with responsibilities, that everything is done so in accordance with the law.
They do have the right to peacefully protest, but particularly for CN, it says that the blockade in Ontario, there is an injunction to stop that protest. It's, however, not being enforced. Is there something your government's going to do about that?
Well, first of all, with the injunction in place, that is up to the police force to look at that injunction and to act on that. It's not for the government to direct the police force to do so. Again, we have the right.
What mechanisms do you have, though? What can the government do?
Like I said, we are closely monitoring the situation.
And that's it?
The federal government is closely monitoring the situation. Again, the injunctions are in place, and obviously all parties need to respect those injunctions, and the police forces operate independently in Canada, and we respect that process.
Well, you know what? It's none of their business. I think that they should leave our people alone. I think we need dialogue between our own people before we have all these other people come from all over the world and start protesting over our people. None of them have ever come and talked to us in Houston. We're Unistoten. All these protesters that don't have no right, closing down the railway. They're blockading the railways and the ships, and oh my God, it's not right. Go away. I want them to leave. I would tell them to get off our territories and leave this alone and let our people deal with this in our own way, in our traditions and our culture. We don't need no outsiders to be telling us what to do. It's divided our families, and there are people out there that shouldn't be out there, that shouldn't have some of them shouldn't have had any names to begin with. They were here for 5 minutes, all of a sudden they got a hereditary chief name. It's not how it works. So I would tell the protesters to back off, go away, leave us alone. It's not your problem. It is our nation's problem, not yours. They should know about what they're doing to our clan system and our people here. They're doing more wrong than good. They don't even know what is going on here. We have to fix our nation before it'll fix anything else. It just upsets me to no end that they can just think that they can go and protest on our behalf when they don't know a thing. They have to find out who we are first. And I don't believe that their protesting is valuable whatsoever. Some of them don't even know what they're protesting against. They don't even know what's going through the pipe. They have to realize that they're dividing our people up here. If they want to go protest something else, go ahead, but leave our people alone.
What is the daily cost to the Canadian economy of the current rail blockade?
This is obviously a question that is very important, not only for this committee but for Canadians. We are paying very close consideration to the economic impacts of the situation we're in as we work to negotiate towards a peaceful conclusion.
How much is the daily cost to the Canadian economy?
As you can appreciate, this is a fluid situation, one which we are working together with industry, with Canadians to get ourselves to, as I said, a negotiated situation. And we're watching those impacts, trying to reduce them through discussions and ways that we can actually, relieve the situation as we work through this negotiation.
Do you know the daily cost to the Canadian economy of this rail blockade?
As I think you might know, the impacts are significant on multiple fronts, and they're impacting people individually, as well as individual businesses. And as the situation is very fluid, it's something we're staying on top of, but unable to come to conclusions with that level of precision.
A coalition of business groups say that $500 million of goods are not moving every day as a result of this blockade. But we want to know the real cost of your government's inaction and your unwillingness to enforce the rule of law and bring this illegal blockade to an end.
Today at Finance Committee, I asked the Finance Minister, who's supposed to be in charge of the money, how much these illegal blockades are costing the Canadian economy every day. He didn't know. Does the Prime Minister?
Yes, the Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we recognize that this is a time of hardship for Canadians, with shortages, with disruptions in their daily lives to commuters, with layoffs as well, Mr. Speaker. This is a situation that needs to end. It needs to end peacefully, but it needs to end quickly. And the approach that we're taking is to look to resolve this in a peaceful manner so that we don't continue to see disruptions like this in the coming months and years.
Well, member for Carleton.
So the Prime Minister, like his Finance Minister, does not know how much this illegal blockade is costing our Canadian economy in terms of dollars. We know today that 1,500 rail workers have lost their jobs. They went home and looked their families in the eye and said, I lost my job. So can the Prime Minister tell us how many Canadians across the country in total have lost their jobs so far as a result of these illegal blockages?
That was the weakest response to a national crisis in Canadian history. But nobody, and I mean nobody, has the right to hold our economy hostage, Mr. Speaker.
That was opposition leader Andrew Scheer calling out Prime Minister Justin Trudeau for finally showing up back home after he was bowing to the Iranian regime on an international trip trying to secure a UN Security Council seat for Canada. Justin Trudeau has basically left our country leaderless. For the nearly 2 weeks these protests have been going on, ostensibly shutting down our country. Sarah McIntyre is here with me. I think it would be worthwhile to sort of step back for a moment. Mm-hmm. We've seen protests in major cities now over the weekend, including a big one in Toronto. What is really happening here? We're seeing dissent amongst even First Nations communities. Let's go all the way to the west and find out, why is BC so upset right now?
Well, it all started in BC, and it has to do with the Coastal Gas LNG pipeline that's been proposed and supported by 80% of the Wet'suwet'en people and First Nation. And this is where the pipeline would go through their territory. Now, what's interesting in BC, there are elected chiefs and there are hereditary chiefs. Hereditary chiefs obviously are not elected, but they have somewhat of a kind of elder role in the community. They are the ones that are opposing this pipeline. And so what they've done is they've gone up and they've set up blockades. Now, what's happened since then? Well, a lot of environmentalists, a lot of extremists from the U.S. have come along supporting the sympathy support protests all across the country, which have basically shut down our entire economy and rail system.
All right, let's talk about sort of what we've heard in terms of the political response from we've heard from the opposition leader. The House has resumed. Justin Trudeau made a sort of a lame speech in the House that really didn't set a path forward. We certainly know that the government, it doesn't matter what level of government, they can't order the police to do anything. We have, however, we have legislation in place, we have regulations in place. LNG has received injunctions. What do you think the political response should be?
Well, I mean, we want to see a leader take action and actually condemn illegal protests. And that's a big thing right now that we're not hearing from Justin Trudeau. And in fact, he's actually legitimizing a lot of these illegal blockades and basically getting down and bowing and being on his knees, just as he was with the Iranian foreign affairs minister. He's doing this again with the protesters. So what happens is there's a court injunction. So CN, VIA, and Coastal Gas have all got injunctions. And the OPP in Ontario and the RCMP in BC have refused to enforce those injunctions. So what are we left with? We're left paralyzed, and we're left being held hostage by these extremists. And hey, this is going to be part of their playbook for every project that they oppose going forward. They know that they are going to be able to shut down the economy and shut down projects in Canada.
There are very legitimate and real issues facing our First Nations communities in Canada, and very good reasons for them to take to the streets, to protest, to have their voices heard. Not the least of which is having safe water, clean drinking water on reserves. And I bring that up because I think what's happening right now is we're seeing a small, very vocal minority overtaking what many First Nations across the country recognize as a good economic project, keeping their young people on their land working and with good jobs. How do you reconcile these two differences?
Well, I mean, this is the perennial problem with First Nations issues. There's constant dissent. There's never just one voice on any particular issue. And so who are you going to stand behind? Someone that is elected and that is supportive of this project? 80% of the people that are in the West Weekend support this project, or a hereditary chief. And that's where the issue comes down on the First Nations side of things. But the other big issue here, and it always gets complicated, are a lot of these extreme environmentalists. They're called Extinction Rebellion. They want to shut down our entire economy, and they're using First Nations. They have been they are co-opting First Nations complaints in order to try and shut down development of any kind in this country.
Well, we are truly going to find out if we are a nation of laws.
Ladies and gentlemen, I know that many of you are very concerned about these illegal protests that have been happening across this country and have crippled our economy and are holding our farmers, our merchants, and of course our commuters and people trying to get across this country hostage because of these anti-energy protesters. Let's keep in mind that the great people of the Wet'suwet'en First Nation support the Coastal GasLink project. They approved it quite a while ago. And of course, the elected council, the membership of those bands, and the majority of the hereditary chiefs are in support of this great opportunity for economic development in their communities. Unfortunately, they have been hijacked by the anti-energy movement and the really anti-development groups across this country. And that's where we're getting these blockades across rail lines, highways, and are just disrupting our entire economy. I was proud of the speech that our leader, Andrew Scheer, had in the House of Commons yesterday, where he talked about having concrete solutions.
It's the workers facing layoffs. And the ultimate victims are the Wet'suwet'en members themselves looking for prosperity for their children, Mr. Speaker.
What's going on here right now is not about reconciliation. It's not about standing up for any treaty rights. And we need to make sure that they are held to account for their disruption of our economy, of not working in the best interests of First Nations, and definitely standing in the path of progress for an economic prosperity for all.
from Alberta, actually. I grew up in Calgary. And I just want to add to your observations about how desperate a situation it is out there. I think some of the members in the committee might be surprised by some of the language they're hearing from business leaders in Alberta. It might sound dramatic, it might sound over the top, but it's actually real. It's actually real. Alberta has been a generous, calm, kind contributor to Confederation for as long as I've been alive. For the last 40 years, province has contributed net about $650 billion to Confederation through taxes that are paid to the federal system and never returned to the province. On a per capita basis, that makes it the largest contributor. In the last 5 years, the province has experienced a massive downturn, not because it's not getting enough money from the federal government, but because the federal government is making it impossible for the province to sell its products at world prices. The irony is that Alberta is actually not looking for a handout. They're actually just looking for a bypass so that they can build pipelines at the expense of private investors, no cost to their fellow Canadians, in order to sell their products at world prices. Failure to allow that to happen has led 200,000 people to lose their jobs. Over 20% of young men in rural Alberta are unemployed. Rural property crime has skyrocketed because people are desperate enough to go onto farm properties and literally siphon fuel out of vehicles that are parked there. Delinquencies have skyrocketed. The commercial real estate vacancy in downtown Calgary is 25 to 30%. Like, that's Great Depression level vacancies. It is astonishing. Like, if you go to Kensington, which used to be a happening hipster neighborhood near the river in downtown Calgary, the Starbucks closed there. Starbucks doesn't close anywhere. You know what I mean? And this is a place where people love to drink coffee. And I don't think people in Ottawa on Parliament Hill realize how desperate the situation is getting. And this is at a time when world oil prices are relatively high, where there's growing Asian demand for natural gas that we could supply from Western Canada, but that government policies are preventing it from going ahead. And I know we're supposed to just ask questions here, Mr. Chair, but having grown up in the province and having many friends and family who are suffering there right now, I just think people around Parliament Hill need to come to the realization of how desperate it is out there and how many people are suffering. And you wonder why you're hearing this heated rhetoric. People are desperate, and they want someone in the government to get out of the way and allow people to rebuild their livelihoods. And, you know, I hope and pray that this government will use the budget as an opportunity to do that, because the situation is going to get more and more desperate. And I'll tell you, if the government thinks that it's going to kill the Tech Frontier mine by simply imposing a bunch of unrealistic conditions and then approving it, and then letting the company pull away, just like the government did with the Trans-Canada pipeline, they just riddled it with impossible conditions, and the company backed away, and then the government said, well, it's not our fault. I'll just... Energy East. The Energy East pipeline. At the end of the day, what they did is they killed it by applying a bunch of, you bought it, you haven't yet built it. But you put on a bunch of conditions that made it impossible for the thing to get built. And then TransCanada disappeared from the project. If you do that in the case of Tech, I think that the anger, the justifiable anger, will shock people in the government of Canada. So I encourage them to change course on this. Let Alberta be the comeback kid of Confederation. It can happen, it should happen, and I want Mr. Kiss to comment on how we can make it happen.